Question 21 gives the formulas for the time it takes for an object to fall on Earth and on the Moon. And it says here the same object is dropped from the same height on both the Moon and the Earth. If the difference in time the object reaches the ground is 0.5 seconds, determine the height. So we want to show that if we have the time on the Moon minus the time on Earth, that's going to equal 0.5 seconds. And the expression we're going to use is the square root form because we want to solve for the h in both cases, and the h is going to be the same. So then the equation looks like this: the square root of h over 1.8 minus the square root of h over 4.9, and that's going to equal 0.5. So this is a double square root equation. Okay, to solve a double square root equation, we need to isolate one of the square roots, square it, and we're still going to have to generate a second square root, which we need to square again. So I'm going to isolate the first square root, h over 1.8 is equal to 0.5 plus h square root of h over 4.9. Okay, so at this point we're going to square the first square root to get rid of the first square root, and that will get rid of this square root here. But it's still going to generate a square root on the right hand side because remember we have to distribute this out. So we end up with h over 1.8 on the left hand side. On the right hand side, when we distribute this out, we get 0.5 times 0.5, 0.5 times the square root, and we have two of them, so we're going to have 0.5 plus 0.5, or 1 square root h over 4.9, plus, when we square the square root, we end up with h over 4.9. Okay, so I'm going to move all the terms over to the other side here. So I end up with h over 1.8 minus h over 4.9. I'm going to combine that fraction. That way I have less terms to expand out when I square out the square root on the right hand side. Okay, so in this case here, the common denominator is going to be 1.8 times 4.9. So 1.8 times 4.9 works out to be 8.82. And so I end up with 4.9h. So I multiply the top and bottom by 4.9 minus, I'm going to multiply top and bottom by 1.8, so 1.8h. And that's all over the common denominator of 8.82 when I multiply 1.8 times 4.9. Okay, so simplifying, all I'm doing is simplifying the left hand side before I square out that square root on the right hand side. So here I end up with 1.3.1h over 8.82 minus 0.25. Okay, so this is going to be a lengthy equation because I'm going to end up squaring this both out. So I'm going to square out both sides again to get rid of the square root. Again, the fact that I'm squaring both sides introduces a possibility of an extraneous root. So when I square this now, so 3.1 squared in the numerator is going to give us 9.61h squared all over the denominator. Actually, let's simplify this first. Let's make this coefficient into a decimal since we are dealing with decimals, so let's get rid of that. So let's see here. Let's go 3.1 divided by 8.82. That gives us a coefficient of 0. So before I square it, I'm going to change this to 0. Oops, I need to change colors here. 0.351 h minus 0.25, and that's equal to square root h over 4.9. Okay, so I'm not going to square on this step, I'm going to square on this other step here. And I just have an easier number to work with. Okay, it's not an easy number, but it's an easier number. So I'm going to square that. Okay, so I'm going to square that number, square this all out on the left hand side, so I end up with 0.12, and I'm going to round that to 124 h squared, and then 0.25 times that number is going to give me 0.087, about 0.088, and I double that, okay, because I have two terms. When I expand this out, I'm going to have 0.351 times 0.25, and I'm going to have two of those terms, so I'm going to end up with negative 0.17, and I round that to 6h, plus 0.25 squared gives me 0.0625. And on the right hand side, I'm going to end up with h over 4.9, and let's convert that into 1 divided by 4.9. The decimal is going to be 0.204h. Okay, so then I'm going to make my quadratic equation. I'm going to subtract point from negative 0.176 minus 0.204 h's, and that's going to give me negative 0.38 h plus 0.0625 equals 0. There's my quadratic equation. Solving for h, I'm going to put it in my quadratic formula, so negative of negative 0.38. Okay, so negative b plus minus 0.38 negative squared minus 4 times a times c. And that's going to be all over 2a, so 2 times 0.124. Okay, so I'm just going to work out the inside of that square root first. And it's going to be negative 0.38 squared minus 4 times 0.124 times 0.0625. And so I end up with a square root value of 0.1134. Okay, and then that's all over 2 times that, so 0.248. Okay, so I'm just going to put that in my quadratic. I'm just going to type that out. 0.38 plus square root of 0.1134 divided by 0.248, and this gives me a solution of approximately 2.89. And that would be meters, so that would be the height. There's an alternative solution, there's another solution where if I subtract the square root and I get 0.174, okay, that's in meters, and this is an extraneous solution. Okay, so our solution is going to be at 2.9 meters.